The slap cracked through the chapel before anyone could pretend not to see it. Ava Bennett's head snapped to the side. The sharp sting bloomed across her cheek as the murmur of mourners swelled into a shocked hush. A single white lily slipped from her hand and fell onto the polished wooden floor beside her father's casket. "Don't you dare embarrass this family," Diane Bennett hissed under her breath, fingers still trembling from the strike. "Not today. Not in front of everyone." Ava didn't raise her hand to her face. She didn't cry. She just looked at her stepmother, really looked at her through the blur of humiliation and disbelief. "I was helping him," Ava said quietly. The old man in the wheelchair sat near the entrance of the church hall, his blanket folded neatly over thin legs. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, as if he had expected the commotion. The ushers had ignored him. The executives had stepped around him. Only Ava had stopped. Diane straightened her black veil and forced a grieving expression as guests whispered. "You always need an audience," Diane muttered. "You couldn't even let your father's funeral be about him." Ava swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. "It was about him. That's why I helped." Diane's eyes sharpened. "You are not in charge anymore. You never were." Across the chapel, board members from Bennett Development shifted uncomfortably. Chicago's most powerful contractors and investors avoided eye contact. No one stepped in. The old man finally spoke, his voice surprisingly steady. "Miss Bennett," he said, looking at Ava, "thank you." Diane turned, irritation flashing. "We've handled it," she snapped. "Please enjoy the service." The old man only nodded. Ava bent down, picked up the fallen lily, and placed it back atop her father's casket. She leaned close to the polished wood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Charles Bennett had built half of the South Side housing redevelopment projects. He'd funded schools, churches, and clinics. He had been respected, feared, admired, and now he was gone. The service ended in a blur of condolences and tight handshakes. Diane stood at the center of it all, accepting sympathy like currency. Ava slipped outside into the cold Chicago air. "You shouldn't have made a scene," Diane's voice followed her. Ava turned slowly. "I didn't. You humiliated me. You slapped me." Diane's jaw tightened. "You think this is about a slap? This is about discipline. This family survives on discipline." Ava's eyes were steady. "Is that what you call it?" Diane leaned closer. "You will learn your place." A black town car pulled up to the curb. The old man's driver stepped out and assisted him into the back seat. Before the door closed, he looked once more at Ava. There was something knowing in his gaze. 2 days later, Ava sat at the far end of the long mahogany table inside Bennett Development's executive boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the gray skyline of Chicago stretching endlessly beyond. Diane occupied her father's chair at the head of the table. "Let's begin," Diane said crisply. "We have continuity matters to discuss." The board members exchanged glances. The doors opened. The same elderly man from the funeral entered, this time without the wheelchair. He walked upright, confident. The room fell silent. Diane blinked. "Excuse me." The man removed his overcoat and folded it neatly over his arm. "Good morning. My name is Harold Whitman." Recognition flickered across a few faces. "Senior partner at Whitman & Cole," he continued calmly. "Personal attorney to Charles Bennett for 23 years. Diane's composure cracked for half a second. "You could have announced yourself properly at the funeral." "I did," Harold replied mildly. "You were occupied." Ava felt her pulse quicken. Diane forced a smile. "What can we do for you, Mr. Whitman?" Harold set a leather briefcase on the table. "We're here to read the will." Diane's fingers tightened on the armrest. "The estate matter is already being handled." "No," Harold said gently. "It is not." He opened the briefcase and withdrew a sealed document. 2 days before his passing, Charles Bennett amended his will. The board members leaned forward. Diane's voice hardened. "That's impossible. I was present at every—" "You were not," Harold interrupted, still polite. "This amendment was executed privately." Ava's breath caught. Harold glanced briefly at her. "Your father believed in something he called the character clause." Silence. "What is that supposed to mean?" Diane demanded. Harold's gaze swept the room. It means control of Bennett Development does not pass automatically to a spouse. Diane stood abruptly. I am his wife. You were, Harold corrected softly. You are not his successor. The air seemed to thin. Ava's heartbeat echoed in her ears. Harold pressed a button on a remote. The conference screen flickered to life. Security footage appeared. The chapel entrance. The wheelchair. Ava kneeling beside the old man. Diane approaching. The slap. The board members stared at the screen, stunned. Harold's voice was calm, precise. Charles instructed me to observe without announcement, to evaluate conduct in moments where no reward was expected. Diane's voice trembled with fury. You staged this. I observed, Harold said. The decision was yours. He turned to Ava. Miss Bennett, your father wrote, character is what you do when nobody's watching. The room was completely still. Harold unfolded the final page. Effective immediately, 100% controlling interest in Bennett Development transfers to Ava Bennett. The words landed like thunder. Diane's face drained of color. No, Ava didn't move. This is fraudulent, Diane snapped. Greg, her attorney, seated halfway down the table, cleared his throat nervously. We need to review. It's airtight, Harold said evenly. Trust protections, voting shares, succession triggers. All legally binding. Diane looked at Ava as if seeing her for the first time. Ava's voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Harold closed the folder slowly, deliberately, as if the sound itself carried authority. What happens now, he said, looking directly at Ava, is entirely up to you. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Diane let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. This is absurd. She has no executive experience. She's never run a division. She barely attends shareholder events. Ava finally spoke, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. I attended the housing site reviews Dad cared about. Diane's expression hardened. You attended charity photo ops. Harold interjected calmly. Miss Bennett now holds 62% direct voting control and proxy rights over an additional 18% through the family trust. That constitutes majority authority. Greg Foster adjusted his glasses. There must be grounds to challenge the mental capacity clause. There are not, Harold replied. Mr. Bennett was evaluated the morning he signed. Independent physician. Documented. Diane's breathing quickened. Charles would never cut me out. He did not cut you out, Harold said. You retain personal assets allocated to you. However, operational control transfers. Ava looked down at the long mahogany table, her father's table. She remembered sitting at its corner years ago, swinging her feet nervously as he explained balance sheets to her like bedtime stories. Leadership, he used to say, is not about who sits in the chair. It's about who protects the people who can't. She inhaled slowly. Call the first review session, Ava said. The board exchanged startled looks. Today, one member asked. Yes, she answered. Diane stared at her. You think this is a game? Ava met her eyes. No, I think it's overdue. Within an hour, the room had shifted. Laptops were open. Financial officers were summoned. Harold remained seated near the wall, silent now. Watching, Ava moved to the head chair. The symbolic weight of it pressed against her ribs. Diane did not sit. She remained standing, arms folded tightly. This will blow back on you, she said quietly. Ava didn't look at her. We'll see. The CFO cleared his throat. There are several active expansions underway in West Loop and River North. And the South Side housing contracts. Ava asked. A flicker of discomfort passed across the table. Those were suspended 2 years ago, the CFO said carefully. Budget reallocation. Suspended, Ava repeated. Terminated? The CFO hesitated. Terminated. How many employees were laid off during that reallocation? Silence. Diane cut in sharply. We optimized operations. It was necessary. Ava's gaze remained on the CFO. How many? 812 across 3 states, he admitted. The number felt like a physical blow. Diane snapped. Those divisions were underperforming. We shifted capital toward high-yield commercial investments. Ava turned to her slowly. Luxury office towers. Yes, Diane said coldly. Which kept this company profitable. Profitable for who? Ava asked. The room went still. Diane stepped closer. Don't try to paint me as a villain. I protected this company while you were busy volunteering at community centers. Ava's jaw tightened. Those community centers were built by this company. Greg leaned forward cautiously. Perhaps we should schedule a strategic review before making. No, Ava interrupted. Her voice carried across the room, firm now. No more delays. She turned back to the CFO. Initiate a full independent audit. I want a breakdown of every terminated public contract, every redirected fund, and every executive bonus tied to that restructuring. Murmurs erupted. You can't be serious, Diane said. I am. You'll destabilize investor confidence. Ava's eyes flashed. Investor confidence was never the mission. Community stability was. Diane leaned over the table. You're emotional. That's the problem. Ava rose slowly from the chair. I'm control, she said quietly. That's the difference. The tension thickened until it felt combustible. A board member finally spoke. If we reopen those contracts, the short-term cost will be substantial. How substantial? Ava asked. 80 to 100 million in reinvestment. Diane laughed again. There it is. Idealism is expensive. Ava held her ground. So is neglect. She looked around the table. My father didn't build this company to chase quarterly applause. He built it to outlast him. No one argued. Harold's eyes showed the faintest approval. Diane's voice dropped, venomous. You think he chose you because you're noble? I think he chose what he saw, Ava replied. And what is that? Diane demanded. Someone who wouldn't step over a man in a wheelchair. The words sliced clean. Diane's face flushed with rage. You humiliated me, she said. You humiliated yourself, Ava answered softly. Greg shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should adjourn. We're not finished, Ava said. She faced the CFO again. Draft reinstatement evaluations for the housing divisions. Begin contacting project managers. I want options for phased rehiring. The CFO hesitated. That could signal weakness. It signals correction, Ava said. The room quieted. One board member leaned back slowly. If she holds majority voting control, we can't override her. Diane stared at them in disbelief. You're just going to let this happen? A veteran investor sighed. We don't have a choice. Ava felt the magnitude of that truth settle over her. Power wasn't loud. It was procedural. It was signatures. Votes. Silence. Diane straightened abruptly. This isn't over, she said, her voice trembling with fury. I will contest every clause. You're free to try, Harold replied gently. Diane looked at Ava one last time. This will crush you, she said quietly. Ava didn't flinch. Maybe, she replied. Diane walked out of the boardroom. The door closed with a controlled but final sound. The room felt different now. Lighter, but heavier. Ava sat back down in her father's chair. For a brief moment, her composure faltered. 812 lives. She pressed her palms against the table to steady herself. Harold approached quietly. Are you certain? He asked softly. Ava looked up at him. No, she admitted. He nodded. Good. She frowned slightly. Good. Certainty can be dangerous. Doubt keeps leaders honest. She exhaled slowly. Then let's start fixing this. And somewhere across the city, former employees who had packed up their desks 2 years earlier had no idea the ground beneath them was about to shift again. 3 weeks later, the second board meeting was louder. Not physically louder. Heavier. Stacks of audit files lined the table. Projected spreadsheets glowed across the wall screen. Red numbers. Reallocated funds. Executive bonuses tied directly to the termination of public housing contracts. Ava stood at the front this time instead of sitting. Walk me through the executive compensation adjustments during the restructuring, she said. The CFO hesitated. Performance incentives were triggered once operating costs decreased. And operating costs decreased because, Ava asked, because labor divisions were dissolved. Say it clearly, she pressed. He swallowed. Because 812 employees were laid off. The words hung in the air like smoke. Diane sat near the end of the table now, not at the head. Her access badge had already been downgraded. She was present only because she still retained minority shares. This is a witch hunt, Diane said coolly. Every corporation optimizes. Ava turned toward her. Optimization isn't the issue. Intent is. You're trying to rewrite strategy with morality, Diane replied. I'm trying to align it. A board member cleared his throat. Reinstating divisions won't automatically bring those people back. No, Ava agreed. But we can offer. She pressed a remote. On the screen appeared a phased reinstatement plan. Housing projects reactivated. Supervisors rehired. Local subcontractors re-engaged. We start with the Chicago South Corridor, Ava said. Then expand to Milwaukee and Gary. That's a $100 million swing, someone muttered. It's a long-term correction, Ava responded. Diane leaned forward. And when investors panic? They won't, Ava said calmly. You sound very sure. I'm not, Ava answered. But we're doing it anyway. The room went silent again. Harold observed from the back, hands folded. Greg Foster stood suddenly. We are filing a petition to contest the character clause. A ripple passed through the board. Ava looked at him evenly. On what grounds? Manipulation. Staging. Undue influence. Harold stepped forward smoothly. The documentation anticipates that argument. He placed another folder on the table. Medical records. Video timestamps. Witness affidavits. Greg's shoulders stiffened. You can delay, Harold said evenly. You cannot reverse. Diane's composure finally cracked. This is betrayal, she snapped at the board. After everything I did to stabilize this company. A senior investor looked at her carefully. You stabilized margins. I saved us, she insisted. At what cost? Ava asked quietly. Diane turned sharply. You think kindness runs corporations? No, Ava replied. Accountability does. The vote was called. Reinstatement plan approved. Audit expansion approved. Executive bonus clawbacks initiated. Diane pushed back her chair with a harsh scrape against the floor and stormed out. The door didn't slam. It closed slowly. That somehow felt worse. Over the next 6 months, the changes were quiet but relentless. Former supervisors received unexpected phone calls. We'd like to discuss reinstatement. Construction fences went back up around dormant housing sites. Local news outlets began noticing. Bennett Development reopens community contracts. Diane's social calendar thinned. Invitations stopped arriving. Credit extensions were reduced. Her penthouse apartment, technically owned by the trust, was reassigned to personal lease terms. She met Greg one evening in a private dining room downtown. They're isolating me, she said through clenched teeth. They're restructuring, Greg corrected carefully. You said we could challenge it. We are, but the trust architecture is thorough. Diane stared into her wine glass. She's dismantling me. Greg lowered his voice. Public sympathy won't favor you if this becomes messy. Diane's expression darkened. Then we make it messy. Meanwhile, Ava sat alone in her office most nights. The skyline beyond the windows shimmered in cold blue light. The reinstatement numbers were encouraging, but not perfect. Only about 60% of terminated employees had returned. Some had moved on. Some refused. Some sent letters. One envelope arrived without a return address. Handwritten. She opened it carefully. You brought my position back. I appreciate that. But some of us lost homes during that gap. Lost healthcare. Lost stability. Correction still has casualties. Ava read the line 3 times. Correction still has casualties. She leaned back slowly in her chair. Her phone buzzed. Harold, how are you holding up? He asked. Is this what he expected? She replied instead. He expected difficulty. I'm fixing things and people are still hurt. That's governance, Harold said gently. There is no version without impact. Ava stared at the letter again. Then how do you decide when it's enough? You don't, he answered. You decide what you can live with. The call ended. Ava stood and walked to the window. Her reflection stared back at her, controlled, composed, distant. Was this strength? Or was it armor? 18 months after the funeral, Bennett Development was stable again. Profits steady. Projects active. Industry magazines called her disciplined. Emotionally precise. Uncompromising. She read those words without expression. Late one evening, her assistant entered quietly. "Diane Bennett is here," she said. Ava didn't turn around immediately. "Send her in." The door opened slowly. Diane stepped inside. She looked different, less polished, less certain. "You've made your point," Diane said. Ava remained by the window. This wasn't about a point. Diane's voice tightened. "You've stripped everything." "Not everything," Ava replied. "My authority, my reputation." Ava finally turned to face her. "You redirected funds from community housing into speculative luxury towers. That was strategy. That was preference." Diane's eyes flashed. "You think you're righteous. I think I'm responsible." Silence stretched between them. "You destroyed my life," Diane said quietly. Ava's voice did not rise. "You weren't destroyed." She paused. "You were corrected." Diane stared at her as if searching for softness. There was none visible, only steadiness, and something underneath it. "Wait." Diane let out a hollow laugh. "Corrected," she repeated. "That's what you call this?" Ava didn't answer immediately. She walked back to her desk and picked up the handwritten letter. "Do you know what this says?" she asked. "I don't care," Diane replied. "It says that even when you fix something, someone still pays." Diane folded her arms. "That's business." "No," Ava said softly. "That's power." Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't sharp. It was tired. "For years," Diane continued, "I kept this company profitable while your father funded pet projects that barely broke even." "They weren't pet projects," Ava said. "They were foundations. And foundations don't impress investors. They weren't meant to." Diane studied her. "You really believe you're different from me?" Ava's gaze didn't waver. "I believe I answer to something bigger than quarterly applause." Diane's voice cracked for the first time. "I was trying to secure my future." Ava's expression shifted, just slightly. "At whose expense?" she asked quietly. Diane didn't respond. After a long moment, she turned toward the door. "Power doesn't stay kind," she said. "It hardens you." When she left, the office felt impossibly still. Ava stood there long after the door closed. "Power doesn't stay kind." The words echoed. She sat down and opened her laptop. Within weeks, a new initiative quietly formed, privately funded, structurally separate from Bennett Development. A legal defense network. Resources for workers displaced by corporate restructuring. Not just hers, but across the city. Anonymous grants. Pro bono partnerships. No press release. No announcement. Just systems designed to absorb impact. Harold reviewed the documents one afternoon. "This goes beyond your father's mandate," he observed. Ava nodded. "It goes beyond me." He looked at her carefully. "You understand this won't erase what happened." "I know," she said, "but it might soften what happens next." Later that evening, alone in her office, she opened her father's final notebook. The last line was written in firm, unmistakable ink. "Power shows you who you are. It doesn't ask permission first." She closed the notebook slowly. Outside, the Chicago skyline glowed against the darkening sky, steady, unblinking, indifferent. Ava stood by the window once more. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't victorious. She wasn't untouched. She was aware. And this time, she chose exactly who she wanted to be.